Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Diminishing Returns this week. We did Kes last week, a very highbrow classic, and we're keeping things highbrow as we look at our first Werner Herzog film, which I think has been a long time coming.
Yes.
This week, yeah. So as always, I'm Sol, and joining me is Alan.
Hello.
And we have very special guest this week, Mr. Dallas Campbell.
Hello. I can't believe this is you've never done a Herzog film.
No.
Why not?
We flirted.
We talk
with it.
about him often enough.
Yeah.
Find that hard. How long have you been doing this?
Oh God,
5 years,
4 years, something like that. Yeah.
You've been doing this for 4 years, and you haven't. Even...
Well, no. To be fair, we do sort of focus on mainstream Hollywood stuff because we're trying to kind of grab an audience, you know.
Herzog, Herzog has carved out this character of himself, this kind of Bavarian with his voice. He talks like this, you know, in Jack Reacher and all these kind of Hollywood.
Yes,
stuff. He is in there.
This is the thing, though. I think that I might prefer Werner Herzog as an entity rather than as a filmmaker.
Same. Yeah.
In a way, I am, because I don't think you can separate his films really from him. So much of appreciating his films is understanding his brain.
That's exactly what happened when I watched Stroszek last night. I kind of watched the film once, not to completely spoil things, but I was sort of sat there like, I don't really know if I got this or appreciate this fully. And then I realised there was an audio commentary with Werner Herzog on the disc that I rented out. And so I sat down and watched that again straight away afterwards. And knowing the production and all the weird little stories and things about it made me find a real appreciation that wasn't there just from watching the film on the first run through.
That's really interesting. I actually think the film does work. I think it's probably his most accessible films. You know, it's a simple story, which we'll go into in a minute, but actually underneath that simple story, it is layered with the mythology of Herzog. And you know, unless you've seen things like The Enigma of Caspar Hauser, you know, the main character, Bruno S., was in Herzog's first film, did a film called The Enigma of Caspar Hauser. Unless you've seen that film, that you're going to miss lots of kind of references when you check as well. So.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation because I didn't get it at all.
Really simple. Okay, should we go?
I just want to quickly touch on our knowledge of Herzog, I suppose, before this. So I think I'm like you, Alan. I think I know more about the man, the enigma. We very nearly called this podcast the Insignificant Bullet podcast at one point, which is a quote from the infamous Mark Commode interview that Werner Herzog gave where he got shot in the stomach by an air rifle.
A good friend of mine directed that sequence. I'll tell you again, like that whole sequence, brilliant as it was, it shows the mastery of Herzog because it was completely set up, of course. But you know, Herzog does that in order to create drama, because he's seeking a deeper truth. So he's like, well, I'm going to do this boring BBC interview. How would it be if someone drove past and shot me? That's fine to conceive of such a thing.
And he does seem very interested in blurring the lines between reality and fiction, I think. And obviously he makes a lot of documentaries. I know he's attracted a bit of controversy as to how he approaches those documentaries from some people. Like, I love Grizzly Man, but I've had conversations with people, I think yourself included, Alan, about how arguably they kind of walk a fine line in terms of ethics with setting things up and twisting the truth a bit.
But you're absolutely right. He does blur the line, and it is a constructed thing. Like Grizzly Man, and also Encountered at the End of the World, the one in Antarctica, and lots of scientists get really cross about it because it's like, that's not what but it's a poem, a sort of poetic element to it.
Oh yeah,
to dig into a deeper truth, something much more profound. And actually, it's funny, just mentioning his documentaries. Encountered at the End of the World, there is a sequence where he's got the scientists lying down on the ice, listening to the sound of whales through the ice. And it's a really bizarre sequence. And of course, scientists would never do that. Please, would you lie down in the ice? Now, why would you do that? It's only when you watch his earlier documentary, The Bells of the Deep, which is about superstition and religious practices in Russia, which had these kind of Russian peasants lying on the ice listening, that you realize you see these echoes and themes and ideas and images percolating through into other films as well. So yes, they are constructed. But that's the thing. It's like, well, why? Documentaries don't have to be just reportage. You can blur the lines. He's an artist. It's a bit like saying all paintings should be realistic looking, and Picasso is a bad artist because his paintings aren't realistic. And I think that's the same. He does play with the form, and I love it for that. And even if you don't know that he's playing with the form, watching things like Grizzly Man, it does. It's one of my favorite documentaries of all time, even though I know it is constructed. Some of it is artificial, some of it is artistic license, etc., etc. That's part of why Herzog, I think, is such a brilliant filmmaker.
Yeah, I think that's fine, but I think on an ethical level, it works because you know there is artifice there. You know that you are experiencing something that is not truth. Whereas I think a lot of people watching a documentary and it's presented to them as, here's a documentary, they expect truth, or they expect the filmmakers to be searching for the closest to the truth they can get. Now, they're wrong to expect that, but...
I don't know. If they feel somehow cheated, it's like, that's not what happened. Well, I'm like, well... understand art better. There's nothing that it's the ethics of Grizzly Man. I mean, we know from the beginning Timothy Treadwell is eaten by a bear. It doesn't come as a surprise. Do you mean the bit with the tape recording, without giving too much away? That's a bit that I know has been controversial. And again, actually, I don't know if you've seen Encounters at the End of the World, the penguin sequence, the famous penguin sequence. Again, that is a constructed thing. But again, it's designed to make you think deeper about the world and things in general. Penguins don't do that, but also I get the humor in it as well. There's a great humor in what he does in his documentaries. So I don't feel cheated, but I understand maybe, I don't know why people feel cheated.
It's that whole thing of, are you going to print the truth or print the legend? And I think, if you're a documentary filmmaker, you are a storyteller, essentially. It's not like you're making a news show.
Exactly.
I certainly enjoy what he does, put it that way.
Any documentary you make, I mean, I make documentaries, and it's not every time you edit something, you are making a choice. You are constructing a reality. It's just that Herzog does it in a slightly different way, in a way that touches themes and ideas and images that are sort of outside of the story. And I'm all for it. I'm like, and also he by his own admission he does it. He's not like sort of doing it in secret. Yeah. When he was talking about the Antarctica documentary, he's like, I was, the British Antarctic Survey wanted me to show my documentary to the scientists, and I said, no, it'd be much better in a poetry class. This isn't how it is.
But I think that documentary filmmaking really informs his fictional films on a level that I didn't appreciate until I watched this. Just to pick an example out, the auctioneer who appears towards the end of the film, this huge, incredible vocal performance of this man, kind of $1, $2, incredibly. I can't even begin to imitate it effectively.
All right, the auction's on, right there, $900 on it. You hold right there, $10,000 on it. Well, $5, I am $4,000 and I'm $5. I am $4,000 over here, down 41 over here, down 2. Whoop, look here, down 41 over here, down 2, down 2, down 2, down 2, down 2, down 4100 over here, down 2, 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 down 3, down 3, down 3 over here, down 4. Whoop, look here, down 44 over here, down 5. Whoop, look here, down 5, down 6 over here, down 46 over here, down 7, 8 over here, down 9, down 9 over here, down 9, down 48 over here, down 9, down $5,000 on it. You 5100 over here, down 2, down 2, down 2 over here, down 3, down 3, down 3, down 4 over here, down 5400 over here, down 5, 55 down 5, 5500 over here, down 5, down 5, down 5500 over here, down 5, down 5, 6 over here, down 7, 5700 over here, down 5800 over here, down 9, down 9 over here, down 9, down 9 over here, down 58 over here, down 9, down 9 over here, down 9, and all that. I ain't 5800 over here, down 9, 9 over here, down 5800 over here, down 9, 5800. Bill Franklin. All right, thank you, Mr. Franklin.
I watched that in the film and I thought, this is beyond parody. This is absolutely insane. This must be a real guy that Herzog's plucked out. And then I did a bit of research into it, and it turns out, I didn't realise this, but Werner Herzog, you're probably aware, Werner Herzog made a short documentary about the World Auctioneer Championships, I believe. And that's a real guy who was in his documentary a few years prior, and he just thought, I love this guy, plucked him out, flew him in from Wyoming to be in the film. And I wrote down the quote, because on the commentary, he was talking about this guy and just fawning over him. And it's just, he said it's the poetry of capitalism, which I just thought was an incredible turn of phrase. But then hearing Herzog call it the poetry of capitalism, that kind of unlocked in my head, oh, that's the tragicomedy aspect of this, that it's just such a ridiculous way to hold these proceedings, and yet it's using this element of reality. And he also said, I just want to, because I wrote this quote down, I'd like to do Shakespeare's Hamlet in that speed. I want to bring Hamlet down to under 14 minutes, which I just think would be, we watched Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet in full on this podcast quite recently. And as a counterpoint to that, I think a Herzog 14-minute Hamlet would be remarkable.
Funnily enough, many years ago, I worked with a director called Ken Campbell, a comedian, and actually very similar brain to Herzog. And he actually did Macbeth in Pidgin English, which is
Oh, wow, yeah.
Ken was obsessed by cargo cults and these sort of languages that evolved in that part of the world. And we did a production of Macbeth in a similar kind of vein to that. But the comedy, I mean, the very opening of the film, we meet this character, Bruno S. Clearly, we're in prison and he's being released from prison. We don't know what he's done in prison, but he's clearly an odd character. He has an accordion and giving him all his possessions back. And the prison warden says to him, he says, whatever you do, Bruno, when you leave this prison, please, all your crimes have come from alcohol. Please, whatever you do, don't have a beer. No more beer. And Bruno asks he says, yes, I will not have the beer. And he holds his hand up and says, cross my heart, hope to die. Hope to die. Hope to die. He leaves the prison, and right around the corner, he walks straight into a bar and orders a beer, which is funny. It's a funny. But at that point, you kind of know his fate is sealed, and then.
Do you know what though? That it is funny. But as soon as the guard said you mustn't have a drink again, I thought the next thing this guy is going to do is have a drink. So then the fact that it takes us 3.5 minutes of them talking to each other and then him walking down the street is just a sort of slow drag to this punchline. So I don't need that. And also, I didn't feel, because that obviously got set up straight away.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel throughout most of the film, until kind of quite near the end, that alcohol was a particularly big influence on his life.
No, it wasn't. I mean, for example, when he's in his caravan in America and the guy from the bank comes in, you see there's beer cans everywhere. No, it's not. It's not a big thing in the character's life. But it's just a thing. It's just in terms of the tragicomedy of it, like the first time we really are introduced to him, we understand that alcohol has been a problem. Released from prison, and the first thing he does is go to a bar, orders a beer. The prostitute and his landlord says, right, we're going to live the American dream. We're going to go off to America and everything will be okay. And of course, they go to America and everything's terrible and everything's unraveled. Actually, I love that scene. And it's just, and partly, I mean, Stroszek, it is a tragic comedy. It's meant to be quite funny. There are moments in it which are laugh out funny. And the bit with the auctioneer, you're expecting an auction, and suddenly he goes into this bizarre performance. And Herzog, because he likes the sound. Again, if you watch Bells of the Deep, there's a sequence with these what they call Tuvan throat singers, these people who make these extraordinary guttural singing sounds from their throats. And Herzog puts them in the film just because they're so amazing. And again, it's just that there is no reason. And it is an amazing sequence, that auctioneer. We should point out that all the characters in Stroszek, which we're talking about, none of them are, well, a couple of them are actors.
Yes, yeah.
In this town in the middle of Wisconsin, not even a town, just this place where rusting cars sit, and there's an old gas station and one restaurant. Famous because it had the most amount of serial killers in this town.
I read online at one point that he was planning to dig up Ed Gein's mother's grave with another documentary filmmaker, and I meant to do a bit more reading into that to figure out how true that is.
The lorry driver's talking about, though, someone's buried in a lake somewhere.
Yeah.
That sort of mythology kind of creeps into the film. It's an interesting film sort of historically, Stroszek, because Werner Herzog became obsessed by this guy, Bruno S., which is known. He was a Berlin street musician who had a terrible childhood. His mother was a prostitute. He was in and out mental institutions all his life. And Herzog had seen him in a documentary and hired him for this film, The Enigma of Caspar Hauser, which is a film very, very much like The Elephant Man. In fact, it was made the same year as The Elephant Man, and in fact edited in the same, I think at the same time David Lynch was doing The Elephant Man, about this outsider who was locked away until he was a teenager and then released into the world and had to make sense of the world. And Bruno S., not even an actor, this street musician, it's one of the most extraordinary performances ever, because it's basically, his life. There's something incredibly autobiographical about his life. Herzog wanted to hire him for another film after The Enigma of Caspar Hauser, this film Wojciech, but then ended up casting Klaus Kinski. And of course, Bruno S. was devastated he wasn't going to be in his film. So Herzog said, I will promise you I'll put you in my next film. I said, well, when is your next film? He said, I will give you a script in 4 days. Stroszek in 4 days, film by Friday, and that's the movie. And again, so there's lots of similarities to The Enigma of Caspar Hauser, that sense of being an outsider, trying to make sense of the world just unraveling before your eyes and just not fitting in at all. I suppose it's the central theme. But I think even without that knowledge, without that history, you could make sense of Stroszek. I don't think it's a difficult film. Alan's looking at me.
Well, I mean, I made sense of it on the...
Yeah, when I say I don't understand it, it's not that I don't sort of understand what it's doing. I just don't understand the appeal of it.
Tell you what I think it is. I'm a big Samuel Beckett fan. And if you've read Waiting for Godot, it's basically the same story as Stroszek. Even the point with the auctioneer and his crazy voice. There's a speech in Waiting for Godot where he talks gobbledygook, like at high speed, blah, blah, qua, 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 and it's the same. It's exactly the same. And Waiting for Godot is a tragic comedy where nothing happens. And in a way, Stroszek is as well. It has that slightly existential, nothing's really going on. Well, things are going on. It's a bit of a road movie. One thing I missed, actually, that first time, I don't know if you saw it, right at the beginning, there's a lovely scene in the prison where they're making tiny origami boats.
The tiniest boat they could make. Yeah.
And then, of course, they take a boat to America. They don't fly to America because he's scared of flying, so they decide to take a boat. And there's lots of foreshadowing I've noticed in little images and ideas. There's such an unlikely trio as well. Bruno S., his prostitute friend, and this bizarre old man who is, again, was an extra in lots of other Herzog films, and is a real guy and a real pianist. We see him play the piano, living in this trailer in this terrible part of America, with serial killers and.
Not only was he a real guy, but apparently he actually had some form of mania or dementia and was prone to just talking, about bizarre things. And that sequence in the film where he's going on about animal magnetism to some hunters it was real. That was just something that he would go on about. And Werner Herzog just found these hunters on the road, asked them if they wanted to be in a film, employed the cinematic concealism or cinema unawareté trope to kind of make use of real life people, film them talking to this guy, and then they rode off. Doesn't sound like there were any release forms or anything like that. I don't think paperwork's a concern when it comes to Herzog.
Herzog is a filmmaker who thrives on chance. He is a filmmaker. There's a great line that Herzog always says, the poet must not avert his eyes. He'll be somewhere and chance will happen. Like the scene where the prostitute, where Eva is working in the little local diner in this place in America. All those people in the diner were real people in the diner. She was just there working, and that's Herzog's magic. And the fact that he can construct that blurring, like we talked about before, that blurring of the reality and real people, the sort of performances that real people give, being so much more, well, not more, but just you get a different quality. There's a film he did called Heart of Glass where he hypnotized all his actors. Again, you get these bizarre performances. Herzog's always trying to do something just different and not in a pretentious way, not trying to be different, but he's just interested in the world and people. It's interesting. I mean, Alan, I don't know if you've seen a lot of Herzog films. I mean, watching kind of Stroszek as a kind of first one, it's good. I can't imagine that was my first Herzog film.
I'm familiar with his work, and perhaps certainly his earlier stuff I'm less familiar with. But yeah, I mean, I knew what I was getting myself into. I guess my question is, what is the line? What's the difference between, wow, this is fascinating, bizarre, and it doesn't really work, and wow, this is fascinating and bizarre, and it's amazing art? Yeah. What's the line there?
Well, I think there's something in any, even to point to, like, Transformers films are particularly bad for this, because Michael Bay has become incredibly self-indulgent as his career's gone on, and he will just think, oh, I like this guy, he's funny, let's just give him 10 minutes in my film to do whatever he wants. And I do think there's a value even in that. It's just about how much you can put a structure around it and some substance and value. And I think Werner Herzog's obviously finding a lot more substance in his art than Michael Bay.
Well, he's not making art films. Herzog hates art films. He hates pretend. That's not what it's about. I think if you go in looking at Herzog or Stroszek and thinking, oh, it's some kind of art film, or I'm missing some kind of deeper meaning, there is no deeper meaning in it. It's a real straightforward road movie. It's like three characters down on the luck. They go on a road trip and stuff. Any road movie, it's odd. There are odd characters in it, and odd scenes happen, which should be taken as funny. And I mean, even the scene at the end when, okay, spoiler alert, they're down on their luck. Again, you know what it reminds me of? Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's exactly the same film. So there's a scene in Butch Cassidy where Butch and Sundance, they've been chased out of America. They've gone down to Bolivia to try their luck. They're sitting around a campfire with the girlfriend, and she says, I'm going to go back to America and be a teacher. I can't hang around you guys anymore. It's got too dangerous. I'm going to miss that last scene if you don't mind. And she goes. And when she goes, that's the end. It's almost like her leaving means that they're just going to completely unravel. And when Eva at the end of Stroszek leaves with the two truckers to go to Vancouver, and it's just Bruno S. and that old guy, they are screwed. You know that they cannot cope. They can't speak English, living in a world they don't understand. They go to a bank to rob the bank. The bank is closed. They go to the first store next door, which just happens to be a barber shop. They steal $32. They cross the street and pick up a frozen turkey as to survive. Like, why? I mean, it's comedy. It's classic slapstick comedy. But again, it's the tragicomedy because that the game's up. They cannot survive. And I won't give away the final scene. One of the greatest final scenes of any film ever made.
His next step after running off with that turkey, having avoided the police who get the other guy, is to kind of crank open this beer dispensary machine, which apparently is a thing that used to exist in the 70s, and just loads up his pickup truck with a load of cans of beer and then drives off with his turkey. And again, this was what Werner Herzog calls on the commentary a quintessential American sadness, which again just kind of made me think, oh yeah, I guess that is. It's this sort of distillation of a certain aspect of American culture. This frozen turkey and all these beers. And
it's loaded with symbolism and metaphor as well. The fact that you jumped out of the truck and the truck is in the car park just going round in circles. There's nowhere to go. We are at the end. It's like the end of a record with the record that's just going round and round. There is nowhere he can go. Bruno S. in that film he's not cut out for this world. He cannot cope in this world. And those strange, surreal dancing animals that we see.
Oh, well.
Herzog's comment on just the indifference of nature. This idea that human beings have some sort of control over nature. But again, it just comes down to the absurdity of a dancing chicken or a rabbit driving a fire truck.
Yeah. We've been singing the praises of the actors in this film and the performances, but my standout performance was the rabbit fire chief.
And again, you don't need to know it, but Herzog's whole mythology is about the sort of dementedness of animals.
Yeah.
Bad Lieutenant, for example, Nicolas Cage looking at iguanas.
Yes.
Look at Casper Hauser, you've got the hypnotizing the chicken. You've got the pig story in Bells of the Deep. You've got all, he's obsessed by animals. Bears and Grizzly Man.
Yeah.
There's a line in Grizzly Man, he says, where Timothy Treadwell saw hope and friendliness in the bears, I saw nothing but a universe of chaos and indifference. It's funny. There is a humor there. It's an existential metaphor, but it's also, there is a humor, and it's Beckett. It's Samuel Beckett.
I must say, I've probably seen somewhere like 7 or 8 Werner Herzog films. Half of those are probably documentaries, so I don't know if they're quite the same, really. But I will say, they often leave me quite cold. Something about his filmmaking style doesn't seem to just grab me on a purely, not emotional basis, but almost on I can't seem to just watch them as pure entertainment. I almost feel like I'm detached from it and I'm having to kind of analyze it in a kind of art house way. And I mean, I loved Fitzcarraldo, but I think I watched that after the documentary Burden of Dreams, which was all about the making of, and obviously really enhanced the story for me.
Yeah, in a way, knowledge of Fitzcarraldo is better.
Yeah,
and when I watched Bad Lieutenant, for example, I'm a huge fan of Nicolas Cage, so I kind of knew how to approach that one, I suppose.
There's a move that Kinsky used to do. It's called the Kinsky Spiral, where where Kinsky would have his shoulder next to the camera, and rather than walk into frame, he'd sort of spiral round so you see his face straight away. Very famous shot in A Geary Wrath of God. And Nicolas Cage does that a couple of times, Bad Lieutenant. It's pure Kinsky. It's like, it's just part of the Herzog mythology. And also just the bonkersness. Watching Nicolas Cage, Bad Lieutenant, is like the pig being let loose. Great performance. It's utterly mad.
But I suppose what I was getting at, I guess, really is that when it came to watch Stroszek, I didn't really have that same in point to get something immediately out of it. So I did kind of just find myself quite detached from it all. And it was I'd say it's about an hour into the film, it really comes to life for me, which is basically the point that Ava is she's not. It's never massively clear if she's his girlfriend or just a friend that he's living with. But his prostitute friend Ava goes off and leaves him, and it was that point when the film just kicked into gear for me, and suddenly it was purely entertaining. But I suppose everything leading up to that, I didn't kind of get drawn into the characters, or I don't know. It was an odd experience, I suppose.
I had a very similar experience actually. Yeah, for me it was when they went and held up the bank. Like everything after that, it was just like, this is the madcap capers of a lunatic in small town America.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a slow burn. I mean, particularly it's really a film of two halves. You've got the first half, which is set in Germany, rainy Germany. The whole film is in German with subtitles. You're not quite sure what's going on. These characters are very odd. When they get to America, it kind of, in a way, turns into a normal kind of American mainstream film. You've got kind of Chet Atkins guitar music, it's Sonny Williams. The music changes. It becomes more familiar because we're familiar watching American films. I think it's a work of art. But then I watched it quite late, and I've watched a lot of Herzog before I watched Stroszek. I thought it was a revelation because I found it such an easy film to watch. I think in a way it's Herzog at his least bonkers.
It put me in mind of John Waters, like that was my obvious comparison, because he finds kooky characters and then just sort of throws them in front of the camera to see what happens. But I always get from John Waters a sense of satire that works for me, which I wasn't getting that here. I didn't feel like this was someone trying to say something or make a point. It was just something that was happening.
Yeah, but he is making a point, which is the sort of futility of the human condition and the fact of just the miscommunication of people and ideas. And, good artists don't think, right, I'm going to make a point. Drama and art by its nature just does make points, I think, in skillful hands. I mean, I like John Waters' films, but I would put Herzog orders of magnitude more important and skillful than John Waters, I'd have to say. But this is just me as well. I mean, maybe it's just my sensibility. But
it's almost this kind of collage of just things Werner Herzog has found, which all fit into a theme. This is a real person I met. This is someone I found. This is a frozen pond we drove past, and I just decided we were going to film here, and the farmer came and yelled at us. The curios at the end, for anyone who hasn't seen the film, at the end, Bruno finds his way to a sort of low-end amusement park full of these kind of animal curios, and it's chickens and rabbits in kind of diorama cases that have been trained to dance for a treat or what have you. The chicken, for example, will see someone there, hop up, go and pull on a little piano that makes something resembling music, and then just starts tapping its feet in the hope that someone will put 25 cents in and a treat will come out. And apparently Herzog's crew didn't like any of that at all. I'm guessing they felt it was cruel against animals, so he, in his words, had to pretty much film all of that stuff at the end himself. And he said it's the greatest thing he's ever filmed, that dancing chicken that the film goes out on.
I mean, if you want a metaphor for the futility and the absurdity, I cannot think of a better one. Actually, there's another metaphor, another thing which I'd totally forgotten about, Alan, there's a scene in the Germany section when he's released from prison, and suddenly we're in a hospital, and there's a baby.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Demonstrating how the baby, this newborn baby, can support itself gripping his fingers if he lifts it up. And he's talking about the reflex.
It's because it was a prematurely born baby, apparently. That's more prevalent, yeah.
Yeah, and it's an interesting... Now, why did he put that in there? Bruno's reaction to it's really interesting. Bruno S. is a baby. He's totally inequipped for the world. It's that circle of life and death. There's that great scene in Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett, where he says, we are born astride the grave. and life is just this fleeting glimpse of light, and we're dropped from the womb straight into the grave. And that's kind of what's going on in a lot of Herzog's films. It is that sort of existential nature of life. It is fleeting and absurd and crazy. And that baby scene at the beginning, and then of course his own Bruno S. killing himself at the end, it kind of reinforces that nature of birth and death.
That's kind of what I mean with it being like this collage of ideas. It's, in a narrative sense, if you're looking at the screenplay or what have you, that scene doesn't really need to be there. It doesn't really progress the story or add anything on that level. But looking at the film as this collection of ideas and themes, and it's a beautiful moment that really does add to the whole, and you can tell Herzog's really kind of thought about it on a poetic level. And
it's not like a rom-com,
but
it's definitely a comedy. The end scene with the turkey, there's a couple of big, real proper slapstick moments in it. There's a couple of really dark moments in it, but ultimately it's the narrative is a very simple narrative that you can follow. It's talking about some of the crazy characters in it. The auctioneer guy, the guy who loans them money, the bank guy, the bank clerk, and has to try and get the money back. And he's so polite and nice, even though you realize you know what's going to happen. He's going to repossess their house, and it's all awful. I thought it was the most extraordinary performance, because if you were asked, and again, this is a non-actor, if you were asked to play that part, you'd probably play as a mean bank guy. I'm going to play mean bank guy demanding my money back. But he's so gentle and nice with them, but yet underneath that gentleness and niceness is, I'm going to repossess your house. I actually got in touch with him. I actually tracked him down, the name, and found him on Twitter and sent him an email. I sent him a tweet just saying, it's one of the great performances in cinema. That's the only film he's ever done, and there's like a couple of scenes, but it's just one of the most perfect scenes, I think.
Yeah, I was actually quite struck by his performance as well. I mean, as I say, the Rabbit Fire Chief's my favourite performance in the film, but he's pretty firmly my second. Because to say he's a non-actor, you wouldn't know, but I think that's probably what informed that performance. Like you say, he presumably has had to have conversations like this in real life, and presumably doesn't approach it from the idea of being a cackling evil bank manager who's going to take all your money. He probably does approach it with empathy and compassion. And
he's a salesman. He's a slick salesman. He's putting the positive spin on everything. That's what he does.
It was funny as well because, of course, Bruno S. doesn't speak any English. This guy talking to him in English. So Bruno S. really has no idea what's going on. He's just sitting there drinking beer, and his girlfriend, who does speak English, is trying to explain. And again, it's that people speaking in different languages. It's a classic Herzog theme. Bruno is just not doing anything, being completely passive of everything. It's just like stuff happens to him. Like he doesn't try to do anything. He doesn't try to improve his lot. He's like a sponge who absorbs all this terrible stuff that's going on.
But that's why I don't understand really what we're supposed to take from the character, because he has no respect, he has no function much of anything, and then this opportunity arises to start again. But it's obviously just exactly the same. And why wouldn't it be? All of the difference is now he's in a country where he doesn't speak the language. And so why would that be any different?
Yes, I know exactly what you're absolutely right, Alan, but there's something about that performance of him just staring and completely open to everything that's going on. He's a non-actor in these films, and it's just mesmerizing. But just the depth and the emotion you can kind of read it.
I find it really interesting that you didn't click with this, to be honest, Alan, because it has all the hallmarks of the sorts of films that you are into. You do tend to like these films where very little happens in the way of solid plot points, and they do just kind of pluck out non-actors and channel them into giving us something real and kind of get a slice of life, I suppose.
Yeah, I know. I do tend to go for that sort of thing, and I was trying to figure out why this didn't connect with me, and I think I just have no way to relate to the characters. So if they are representing some universal human truth, then I do not experience that.
I think you're too happy. Maybe that's what it is.
As I say, we did Kes last week or the week before on this podcast, and you loved it, but then you're from Yorkshire, so I suppose maybe it is just that removal from what you're saying on screen.
Yeah, but I was not brought up dirt poor, the son of a miner and everything. So
but your grandparents were, and you were relating it back to them. And...
I could see familiarity there, and I could see things there, but I want to find something here that is a kind of a greater universal thing that I can hang on to. I don't have to relate to the specifics of the situation.
Maybe give it another go. I mean, it's funny actually. I've seen Stroszek. I've only seen it twice actually, and I'm on a second viewing. I appreciated it even more. Actually, the other big legend we should say about Stroszek is, of course, Ian Curtis from Joy Division. Committed suicide having just watched Stroszek.
Well, that I can understand.
Apparently, the dancing chickens.
If you were in a bad place, it might just push you over the edge.
When I went down my Herzog rabbit hole, whenever it was a few years ago, I was in a pretty bad place, and I think they're funny. I remember, when the Smiths were happening in the 80s, I was really into the Smiths. Everyone's saying, "Oh, the Smiths are so depressing." I'm like, really? They're hilarious. I'm like that with Herzog. It's like I see nothing but humor and fun and tongue-in-cheekness, and there's always a humor. Nothing's ever taken seriously. Even the most depressing, even suicide at the end of Stroszek. In a way, the fact that I can't remember what's written on the back of on the chairlift that he's on.
Yeah, am I really here?
Am I really here? There's a kind of wit to it. The rabbit with the fire engine is funny. The police come and the van's on fire, and the police chief says, "Hey, we need an electrician down here. We can't turn off the chairlift, and the rabbit's still dancing, and the chicken's still dancing." It's absurd. It's Marx.
I think it probably depends just how you're wired. I think some people are wired to kind of enjoy cathartic stuff, and I'm certainly like that. At the start of the coronavirus pandemic, there were, for various reasons, a whole load of things causing me a great deal of anxiety and what have you. And I remember just thinking, I need to sit down and watch a really good zombie movie. And I just went away and I watched Night of the Living Dead again, which I love, and a French film called The Night Eats the World, which I'd seen recently. And then I just felt great. And it was this cathartic kind of, I've got all my underlying, issues with fears out by watching these scary movies. But then my girlfriend, for example, is the exact opposite of that. If she's in a bad mood, she can't watch anything remotely bleak or depressing. We've only just finished watching the HBO series Succession because it's a bit too bleak, just these unpleasant characters being mean to each other. If she's not in a good mood, she can't deal with it. Yeah, I can completely see how for someone a film like Stroszek would be depressing and just, enough to tip them over the edge, but then someone else would be like, this is brilliant. I feel great having just had a laugh at the absurdity of life.
There is a bleakness to it. There's absolutely the landscape. There is a bleakness. But I don't find it a bleak film in any sense. It is bleak, but just because something's bleak doesn't make you feel sort of bleak. Yeah. I mean, he's very stoic as a filmmaker as well. He's very economical. He doesn't start about. Yeah. He says filmmaking should come from the thighs. Film script shouldn't take more than a week to write. If you take more than a week, you're doing something wrong.
But again, that this film taking 4 days is a great example of that. Because when I first watched it, I guess I was expecting more of a primmed and proper film, and then knowing it was this real kind of, we just turn this film out to make a film kind of approach, it made me view it more like like Shane Meadows will go away and make a film in 3 days or whatever. And it was that kind of, okay, as a kind of madcap, we're throwing this together and just capturing something in the moment. I really got a lot more out of it. So,
and that's the thing, he is prolific, Herzog. He is absolutely, I don't know how many films he's made, 80 films or something, because he just gets on with it. He doesn't fart around. And so, and some of his films I can't watch. I just think are not very good. What I love about him is the fact that his good films are just so good. They kind of make up for everything else. There's nothing ever mediocre about him. And the fact that he'll go out and shoot and would rather shoot, and sometimes they don't work. I like that. I think I like his approach to making. I'm actually doing this. I don't know if you know those master classes that you get online. I got subscribed to it just so I could watch the Herzog.
Is there a Herzog masterclass? I had no idea.
Anyone, not even if you're not a filmmaker, just as a guide to life.
Yeah,
Herzog talking about how and why he makes films and all these images. He talks about Stroszek and all these images and ideas percolating around. And his great advice to everyone is read Odyssey, read Homer, read the Iliad, and that's where all his ideas come from. The themes of Stroszek are operatic. They are grand themes. but presented in the most ordinary and small.
That's an interesting point, I suppose, because he is a bit of an oddity in that he's a filmmaker who doesn't really watch films.
He never watched or whatever, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Until he was because he was in The Mandalorian recently, which I watched a few days ago for the first time. I heard an amazing quote about that where apparently they took away the this Baby Yoda puppet thing. And they wanted to film it with a real life animatronic puppet, and then they wanted just to be safe to do it with nothing there so they could put a CGI version in if it didn't look good enough. And they took the puppet away having filmed with him, and he said, what are you doing? And they said, we just want to get a blank take for the effects in case. And he apparently said to them, you are cowards, and told them to believe in themselves and believe in their vision.
Exactly. Yeah. Herzog is he is the greatest soldier of cinema. He would never use a storyboard. Storyboards are the instrument of cowards. When you're on set, when I'm on set, doing all those plans, all those ideas you've had sitting in an office, writing a scene for a documentary or whatever, you have to then be open about reality and that takes courage. But that's, fortune favors the brave, and I think that's why Herzog is such an outstanding director, because he never compromises. There's never any compromise, and even if it doesn't work. It's that lack of compromise that is so extraordinary and refreshing in a world where casting is done by algorithms now. It's a bit like The Bad Lieutenant, actually, because obviously The Bad Lieutenant has been made 20 years previously. I've never watched this film. I actually quite like the original, the Abel.
Yeah, no, it's great. I like both of them, yeah.
But I prefer the Nicolas Cage one is wonderful. Absolutely crazy. Like peak Herzog. Can I ask you, what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite Herzog film? Or I know you're not great students of Herzog, but do you have any that you kind of like? Or Alan, what? Alan's like, no.
For me, Grizzly Man is one of my all-time favorite films.
Yeah, me too.
So
yeah, that's the one that leaps out to me. But I loved Fitzcarraldo when I watched it. And other than that, I've only seen some of his other documentaries, Stroszek, Nosferatu.
I love his Nosferatu. It's great.
Yeah.
What else have I seen of his? Bad Lieutenant. So there's a lot for me to continue watching. But I've had his entire filmography on my watch list for years now. So it was really nice to finally be ticking one off.
I was trying to think what I've actually seen. I've seen the kind of the real big classics like Aguirre and Fitzcarraldo, but I've seen, in terms of his sort of earlier stuff, I've seen, I think, just Stroszek and Enigma of Caspar Hauser. I think those are the only ones I've seen.
Oh, what did you think of Caspar Hauser then? Because it's basically the Elephant Man. It's the same story.
I found it a bit more engaging than Stroszek, I think, just because there's more of a narrative. Yeah. Which is just easier for me to hang on to.
Yeah.
And I was a bit familiar with Caspar Hauser's story kind of anyway. But ultimately, I don't feel like I got anything out of it, put it that way. And it just felt like this kind of little curiosity of an odd character who was. But I also, the interesting thing, because it's not presented that way in the film at all, but Caspar Hauser was just a con man, basically. Like, that seems to be the truth of the situation. But in the film presents his story, and we see the man sort of teaching him to walk and things. I just love that he turns up with a big hole in his chest and he's bleeding to death and he's accidentally stabbed himself too hard. I like that sort of thing. But
I actually, after I watched Stroszek the other night, I went online and there's a couple of documentaries about Bruno F that I watched, and it's a sad story. The guy was, didn't work again after those films and kind of went back to his old life of being, a homeless Berlin street musician, and obviously has a lot of problems. And interesting character. Gosh, that something else just sprang to my mind. Yeah, the scene where he's sort of being beaten up in his apartment in Stroszek. Again, the scene where he's playing the piano and he's worried about if he dies, what will happen to his piano.
And that's his actual piano, the real guy.
Real piano, real apartment.
Which he bought with his fee for Caspar Hauser, and it was like his pride and joy.
Yeah. All those little things suddenly kind of sprang up when I watched it again. Oh.
But what does knowing that add to the experience for you?
It's just a beautiful image. The fact that he sort of treats his piano like a child, and it's knowing about his own life and the scene with the baby and what is a baby, and and then this is his baby. This is his entire life, his accordion and his piano. And when the pimps walk in and start trashing his apartment and pull his accordion apart, it is a sense of like, actually, they've just destroyed the most important thing in his life.
But we don't see his response to it. We don't see him having any emotional reaction to it.
No, you don't. You don't need that, but you feel it because you know what it means. You know the importance of his accordion to him.
But as part of that narrative, we see him leave everything behind. But there's no kind of emotional drag there where, oh my God, I've had to leave my baby piano behind.
No, you don't need that because unless a filmmaker would lay on the emotion, the audience does the work. Herzog, he suggests things because he doesn't need to. It's kind of what you don't see.
So, I mean, we rate our films out of 10 on this show, so I suppose we might as well go in kind of ascending order, what I assume is going to be ascending order. Alan, if you want to give your final thoughts on the film.
Well, like I say, I think I appreciate what you get out of it because I think I find similar things in other films, but for me, it left me cold. It feels like The Emperor's New Clothes to me. It just feels like there's nothing really there. I guess you find in it what you want, that's fine. That's art, I suppose. But for me, I think and I am quite literal, I think, as a film viewer. I do like a strong narrative and character to grab hold of. So for me, it just felt like there was 14 minutes of plot here, and the rest of it is just kind of throwing shit at the fan and see what sticks, which I think is probably Herzog's approach. Like just keep throwing stuff and see what happens. But ultimately, yeah, it kind of leaves me feeling cold. There's enough funny moments there to get me through, and I did quite like the ending. It kind of just suddenly came together for me at the ending.
Yeah.
I guess as an overall experience, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10.
Ooh.
Oh, that's pretty good. What's your do you have a 10 out of 10 film, just out of interest? Like, what do you have a film that you always kind of cite if anyone asks you what your 10 out?
Yeah, I always would go with, say, like Fargo or Trainspotting.
Well, there you go. I would agree with you on Fargo. I think that's a thing. Trainspotting less so, but Fargo definitely.
So, I mean, I'll go next because I think this is going to be ascending. But yeah, I mean, for me, I kind of get where you're coming from, Alan. The film did kind of leave me cold. I couldn't just watch it as a pure bit of entertainment. I kind of had to put my analytical hat on. But I still got a lot out of it. And it's, it's like I say, it's like Marcel Duchamp who, put that urinal in an art gallery to sort of say, is this art? I've taken it out of the context of a toilet. It's now in an art gallery. Is it art? And I think that's a similar approach here. Like I say, it's this collage of just oddities and ideas and themes being thrown together into a film. And you can kind of get something out of that or not. But it really comes down to how you're going to approach it and read it, I think. And knowing about the production and what Herzog was going for really did help me get something else out of it. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I think it's a respectable bit of work, but yeah, I mean, it's not my favourite Herzog film. For the record, Grizzly Man for me is a 10 out of 10 film.
So,
well, I love Grizzly Man. I know what you mean about ideas being thrown around. I wouldn't say they're thrown around. I think Herzog is a master at understanding narrative. And yes, he does present you with extraordinary images, sounds, music. But obviously, I watched a lot of Herzog films and think about Herzog a lot. I think he is the greatest living filmmaker. I don't think there's anyone I can cite. The Coen brothers you mentioned, I absolutely love as well. I think they're terrific filmmakers. But in a way, I would put Herzog above even the Coen brothers. In the sort of pantheon of Herzog films, I reckon sort of 10% of Herzog films. I reckon sort of maybe 10% of Herzog films are kind of unwatchable. 80% of Herzog films, they're okay. And then sort of 10% on the other end are just sort of life-changingly good. And I would put Wojciech in that 10%, I'm afraid. I think it's a wonderful film. Can I give it a 10 out of 10?
Go for it, yeah.
I'm going to give it a 9.5. I think I understand both of your points, but I see a very tightly written film, actually. It is a small narrative, road movie ultimately with a sad ending. It's Thelma and Louise, it's Butch Cassidy, it's that. But I'm going to go 9. 9. Go on, I'm going to be a bit mean. I'll go 9. You convinced me.
I agree. Actually, it is very tightly written. It's but I suppose on the bare face of it, I think it's a very simple, in parts quite unengaging plot, or the writing anyway. And it's those ideas that are then kind of hung on that and used to dress it that give the film a kind of spark for me. So I suppose that's what I mean when I say throwing them around. It's kind of like, oh, let's get that in on this bit. And right, well, I will give you a recommendation, both of you, but I think you in particular, Dallas, might get something out of this. There's a film called Incident at Loch Ness. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it.
Herzog is in it as himself, and I believe he produced it.
Okay.
But the whole thing is a kind of mockumentary about Werner Herzog making a documentary about the Loch Ness Monster. So it's a guy called Zach Penn, who is a screenwriter. He's written things like X-Men 2 and, you know, some big Hollywood films, who's obviously friends with Werner Herzog, and it's directed by Zach Penn. And yeah, it's just about them going on an expedition to Scotland to find the Loch Ness Monster and things going wrong. And it's a very odd bit of work. But if you're a fan of Werner Herzog, and particularly what he does with his whole blending between documentary and fiction and everything, it's a really interesting film just to see. And he of course talks about, you know, the kind of enigma that he is and the stories surrounding him. He talks about a well-known story that he pulled a gun on Klaus Kinsky, was it, to get a performance out of him, and
Kinsky threatened to leave the set of Aguirre, and Herzog did not let that happen, and so stopped it.
I don't know how much of that's apocryphal, but certainly in Incident at Loch Ness, Herzog himself goes, "This never happened. It's a story. It's a fun story, but I would never do this." But then, of course, Zach Penn pulls a gun on him to try and direct him. And
the story is always much better. He's a storyteller.
Yeah. Exactly. So I would check that film out. It's, as a Werner Herzog fan, it's just very interesting, and I could watch him in front of camera do anything, to be honest. So yeah.
Oh, I tell you what, this is a great book actually. It's called Werner Herzog: A Guide for the Perplexed: Conversations with Paul Cronin. Great tome of a book. But if you want to sort of get inside the minds and the films of Herzog, it's really, I thoroughly recommend it. And it's fun watching his films. Herzog hates people analysing his films. You shouldn't ever have to have an analyst to watch a bloody film. But it's a great book. And actually, in a way, exploring the Herzog oeuvre is a bit like playing a game, because it's a bit like doing a jigsaw puzzle. Themes start. I remember that idea from this film, and the penguins in Antarctica know that what he's meaning is that's the end of Cobra Verde, and you start to kind of piece together those things, and there's a funness to that which I really enjoy. It's a bit like doing a crossword puzzle or something. Yeah, it's good. My life with Herzog. I want to do a cooking program with Herzog. That's what I want.
Start with the boot that he boiled for that bet. What was it? I think he said he just threw loads of garlic and hot sauce in to try and make, disguise the flavour as much as possible. That's the way to do it. In fact, Incident at Loch Ness starts with Werner Herzog throwing a dinner party and having a load of his Hollywood friends like Jeff Goldblum over, and he's cooking a very weird, like, I think it's Himalayan or something, this very obscure dish that he's trying to replicate that he, saw out on his travels. And so I think he'd go for that. He seems like a bit of a foodie.
Oh, he is a foodie. He's definitely walking. Walking is this other. Actually, in the masterclass thing you do, you get little homework assignments. And one of us, in 1974, Herzog walked from Munich to Paris because he forbade Lotte Eisner, who was the great German film critic, who around during the times of, who was the great German expressionist filmmaker, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Oh, yeah.
Murnau.
Yeah, and of course, she was the great film critic that linked German expressionism and German cinema to the new German cinema. And of course, a lot of German culture destroyed by the war, etc. Anyway, she was in hospital dying in Paris, and Herzog forbade her to die. He said, you cannot die until I've seen you. And he walked from Munich to Paris in 3 weeks. And he wrote a journal of it, of walking in ice. Some of the most beautiful prose I've ever read. A complete sort of stream of consciousness in a way, but absolutely beautiful. And he got to Paris and met her, and she wasn't dead, and then she died after. It's a great anyway, one of the bits of homework is to do that. To go for a very, very long walk and keep a journal. As filmmaking homework, so many filmmakers I know, young filmmakers, worried about what bloody camera they're using and faffing about, bouncing around, and trying to pretend to be filmmakers. And, the poet must never avert his eyes.
Right, well, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Lovely talking to you both.
You too.
Yeah, likewise.
No more comment. Full stop.